Revolutionary greetings, comrades. We meet once again discussing the question of Matabeleland and Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for the comments that you are giving, and thank you so much to those that are following this discussion. Your comments do enrich us because we always say that we learn from each other. It is important that we learn from each other, and also that we promote the culture of debate. It is important. We said, remember, when we're discussing what is to be done, we said we must use social media as a tool to mobilize society, and also as a tool to educate ourselves. Kunabanye abathi bona umuntu onjengami okhuluma isiNdebele angeke abe ngupresident weZimbabwe. This is what we want to discuss tonight. There are those that say Ndebele speaking cannot be a president in Zimbabwe, cannot be head of state and the government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces in Zimbabwe. In this discussion, we want to dismiss that. But so we must put our facts on the table because we cannot just join a chorus. Firstly, we must understand when we say a head of state, what do we mean a head of state? But what is a state? We are not going to spend time defining the state, defining government, but it's important to understand what a state is, so that when we engage, a brief definition of a state is that the state is an organ of class rule. It advances the interests of one class over the other. Umbuso uphethwe ngabantu abaphethe inotho. Esizweni sakithi kunabantu abanothileyo kulabantu abangabayanga. So umbuso ubhekelele kakhulu abantu abanothileyo over abayanga. In other words, the modern state advances, defends, and deepens the interests of the class that it represents. And the class that it represents, the class ebusayo, not governing, but the class ebusayo. The class ebusayo is the one that controls ama banks, right? A controller a Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. If you control the Reserve Bank, if you control the mines, right? If you control the land, this is why there's so much debate around the land. Even if we do not agree with the ZANU-PF, but in their manifesto 2013, they titled it "Land is the economy," and the economy is land. And this is why even in South Africa, there's so much debate around the question of land ownership. Who owns land, right? So those who own land, who own the financial institutions, who own the mines, who own the industries, are the ones. It is the class, that it is the ruling class. Sititina, those are the ruling class, right? Then, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, because you now have this ruling class, because the state is an organ of class rule, right? Then Karl Marx, lo Engels, because who head of state or who president chairs what is called the executive or a cabinet. We normally call it cabinet, right? Who president is the head of cabinet, chairs the cabinet, or what we call the executive. So nxa sikhuluma ngama-separation of powers, we are talking of executive, which is cabinet. We talk of parliament, right, which is legislative arm. Sikhulume nge-judiciary, right. So Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto besithi bona, the executive of the modern state is nothing but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Kutshoni lokho, right. I-cabinet, i-executive, bafana nje lo caretaker we-flat enhlala kini, right. U-caretaker is the one that collects ama-rentals. It does not own the building, but yena ungu-caretaker who manages the affairs of the building. La enhlala khona a flat or some lawe maybe lapho hlala khona. So the executive operates like a caretaker. The person who owns the building is the landlord, right? So those who own the economy, our own Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, our owner the mines, we can count how many mines we have, our owner the land, our owner the industries, our controller what we call our productive forces, right? The decisive means of production. Yibo ababusayo. Then upresident the cabinet bese besiba ngokhetheka, which therefore means ukuthi a president is not elected, or one does not become a president on the basis of popularity. Yes, we agree that politics is a popular contest, right? Ama elections by their nature ngama popular contest. It's about popularity, but it does not always follow that a popular person wins the election or become the president. There are many examples that we can give. For instance, let's start here, South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa is known that is not popular, right? But he's the president. He led the ANC, yatola 40% of the vote, but he's the president. He is not popular with the mass of the people, but he's a president, right? Emmerson Mnangagwa is not popular with the people of Zimbabwe, but is a president. Paul Kagame comes from a minority tribe in Rwanda. Is not popular with the mass of the Rwandese, but is a president. So there are many examples that we can give. There are many examples of where umuntu that comes from a minority tribe or ethnic group becomes a president. So the notion of therefore saying ukuthi Ndebele cannot be a president, it is not accurate. Ngicela ukuthi ngilibekele ukuthi how does one become a president? Right. The world, because for you to become a president, you cannot just become a president, because the world now is getting divided into two. You remember the Cold War, what the Cold War did. You had abanye that were supported by the Soviet Union, right? Others by the West. But now the world is getting divided, is getting into two camps, the world. You have the West as led by the United States and Britain. You then have BRICS as led by China, Russia, South Africa and other members of BRICS, which is challenging, particularly the economy of China, challenging the dominance of the American economy. Right. So for one to be president of Zimbabwe, the powerful nations in the world will have a say. it is not about ordinary people in Zimbabwe. Alingizwa, but ngizwa ngelinye ilanga. It is not about the ordinary people that decide who becomes president. The international community decides. And the international community, once they pick up their candidate, they fund that candidate. They do EPR. This is why PR in politics is so important. This is why funding in politics is so critical. So if BRICS, right, BRICS member states, pick up a candidate, whether the person is Ndebele or Shona, because they then believe that their economic interests in Zimbabwe will be served by this person that they've selected, irrespective of their ethnic origins. They will fund this person and the party that this person represents and become president. The Americans and the West will fund their own candidate and this person becomes president. So in the last 24 years, what we have had is that because the ZANU-PF propagandist, as led by Professor Jonathan Moy, as early as 2000, right? But MDC is a stooges of imperialist forces, right? So the war, if I were to use that, was in Zimbabwe. The contest, let me use the right term, the contest between ZANU-PF and the MDC was seen as a contest between the imperialist forces and the anti-imperialist forces, right? And Mugabe found himself in the camp of the anti-imperialist forces. And Mugabe was then supported together with his party, irrespective of what they were no longer popular with the people of Zimbabwe. Hence, they remained leading Zimbabwe up to this day. Right? So, there's always this notion then to say, no, Amashona will not vote for a person who's in Ndebele to be president. It is not the case. It is about the economic interests of business people in Zimbabwe first. The economic interest of the international business people, who then decide if China, Russia, would say, Comrade Vusumuzi Chuma can be their candidate, right? They will take Comrade Vusumuzi Chuma to all Bamenzeli PR, in all strategic meetings. They fund the party that Comrade Vusumuzi Chuma will be representing. Not with the stand, they would say, Comrade Vusumuzi Chuma ubuya engai, he then ends up being a president. Right? So it is not about the majority. And the other example, we know by November 12, or before the military began rolling their tanks in Harare, right? Every ZANU-PF member had said Emerson Mnangagwa must ahambe, right? Everyone had discarded Emerson Mnangagwa when he was fired as deputy president of Zimbabwe and fired from ZANU-PF. Every structure of ZANU-PF was pro-G40, was pro-Mugabe, right? But within a week, where did ZANU-PF members find time to sit in a meeting to review and say, now we need to bring Emerson back? Right? So it tells you that the ZANU-PF supporters and the members are not the ones who made the decision. that Emmerson Mnangagwa should become the president of Zimbabwe and the president of ZANU-PF. It was not ZANU-PF supporters. It was those who saw Uguti having Emmerson Mnangagwa as president, unpopular as he was, and as unpopular as he still is today. Their economic interests were going to be protected under his presidency. So Emmerson Mnangagwa had to become president. He is not popular. So if it is about popularity, Morgan Tsvangirai would have been president of Zimbabwe in 2008. I said in the other discussion that Professor Adam Tambara, in his book, which I'm reading, I should complete it this weekend, that Mtambara won, Tsvangirai won 73% of the vote in 2008. Because the anti-imperialist forces, they realized that their economic interests were not going to be supported or protected by the presidency of Morgan Tsvangirai. It took almost 2 months to announce the presidential results. And it was quick to facilitate the dialogue and from July 2008 and ensure that by the 12th of September, the agreement had been reached to form the government of national unity. Tinabanye, we then saw the public signing, which of course I attended on the 15th of September 2008. And thereafter we know what happened. Right? So I'm saying as the world gets split into two, there are competing interests. There are those that are pro-West in Zimbabwe. And the West wants to have their own candidate to be president. Then there are those in BRICS who want their own person to be president. They don't look, Uguti, this person is a Ndebele, is a Shona, or is what? No. They are simply driven by economic interests. The embassies in Harare, Western embassies, they play a key role in deciding who leads the opposition if that opposition is supported by the Western powers. Right? How did Chamisa become president of MDC Alliance when Morgan Tsvangirai died? He was not senior to Tendai Pitt and others, but he became the president. Right? It's not about popularity. As I move to conclusion, people would be saying Thokozani Kupe should have been president because she was deputy president. Some go back to 2000 to say Ubabu Gibson Sibanda should have been president because he was president of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. Here is the thing. Ubabu Gibson Sibanda was not exposed to the international community. Right? Hence, he did not have the support from the international community to be the leader of the opposition. Right? It was not because Tsvangirai was popular. No. It was because Tsvangirai was exposed to big capital. Not because he was shown. It was because he was exposed to big capital. Right? And they took advantage of him. So was Comrade Thokozani Kupe, was not exposed to big capital. Right? So a person who's exposed to these two contending, if I might call them, class might not be the right term, but contending forces, that is the West and the BRICS, right? China, Russia, they will sit down and say, who should we support as a presidential candidate in Zimbabwe? Who is the person that can take care of our economic interests in Zimbabwe? They then select their candidate. We'll certainly see this candidate being invited in Beijing to speak. We see this candidate being invited in all these capitals of BRICS member states. And this candidate will be packaged irrespective of their ethnicity. And they will be presented as a person that will lead. Just as a candidate that is liked by the Americans and the British gets paraded. So we should not look into a question of ethnicity too much, read to it too much. No. The reason why, the reason why Joshua Nkomo, because some would be saying, Loko wehlula Joshua Nkomo because he was Ndebele. No. Dr. Joshua Nkomo did not win in 1980, not because he was Ndebele. Dr. Joshua Nkomo did not win because he represented the Soviet Union in this part of the world. Right? He did not represent the Americans and the British. You can go back to the Lancaster House discussions. ZAPU, under the leadership of Dr. Nkomo, wanted the land. And the slogan, ZAPU, was Twafinyela Slalisana. Let us share the land. Whereas Mugabe had no interest in the question of land. Right? So the British realized that if Joshua Nkomo becomes the leader of a newly independent Zimbabwe, Joshua Nkomo, whose party was in alliance with the African National Congress, MK was going to establish military bases inside Zimbabwe. Right? And the apartheid South Africa, which was supported by the West, because the West declared ANC, PSC, and other liberation movements as terrorist organizations. So if we are going to have Joshua Nkomo becoming Prime Minister on the 18th of April 1980, MK was going to set up bases. And this would have changed the strategy of fighting against the apartheid regime by the MK as led by the armed wing of the ANC. Right? So, to curtail that and to bring that to a stop, Mugabe had to win and frustrate Joshua Nkomo. And we discussed with the ground where it operated in Matabeleland. It was strategic where it operated. It operated in the military corridor that was to be used by MK from Zambia, behamba through Matabele North to South Africa, and the MK could not move. And the other comrades of the ANC were arrested during Kukraund. So Nkomo, because Nkomo phela, because he was in Ndebele, mabhena nele uzamali ngama nationalists lelikwenza kwehlula Nkomo. Kwehlula Nkomo not because of his ethnicity, but kwehlula Nkomo because he was not a puppet of the imperialist forces. He was not a puppet of Britain. He was not a puppet of the Americans. Nkomo was supported by Soviet Union, was supported by Cuba, and the others that were anti-imperialist. Hence, Nkomo did not become the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe in 1980. Lokho kokuthi Nkomo, because wayengasoshona kumbele Ndebele, it is just but propaganda. Lokho kokuthi a Ndebele person cannot be president, it is just but propaganda. A person, only a person that is supported by the two contending international forces will easily become a president. Please write your comments. I see Comrade Mbambo, you are saying, so Lapa Mabena, you are denying Uguting. There's no, I'm not denying that there's no tribalism in Zimbabwe. Because ZANU right, created in 1960 by the imperialist forces, yahle ya embrace ethnicity, tribalism, to explain the split, so that the split was seen as that of Shona and Ndebele. And this is why ZANU-PF even today still practices ethnic patronage. The reason by ZANU-PF government to deploy Shona-speaking teachers and nurses in Ndebele communities border, it is part of ethnicity patronage, right? So that you weaken the unity of the people of Zimbabwe, that the Ndebele and Shona will not unite against the ZANU-PF. That is the whole strategy. Because people would be writing and saying, no, we cannot work with the Shona, Lama Shona Vela, we cannot share anything. That is the strategy of ZANU-PF. Send the Shona in the Ndebele communities as public servants, so that the Ndebele will see the Shona as enemies. Then use the state propaganda as they used during Kukraund, for the Shona to view the Ndebele as the people who are not Zimbabwean enough, as second-class citizens. You will know the adverts that were being carried out, Mundebele this then. It was all propaganda, right? So that the Ndebele and the Shona will not unite against the ZANU-PF. So you must promote ethnicity. So tribalism exists in Zimbabwe, and it exists thanks to the strategy of ZANU-PF to keep us divided. They are doing exactly what the colonialists did in creating, particularly here in South Africa, homelands, to say Zulu, KwaZulu, Xhosa in Eastern Cape, Tswana, the Ndebele and KwaNdebele, and so forth and so forth, so that these different ethnic groups in South Africa could not come together, right, and they fight the apartheid regime. And the ZANU-PF is doing such that. This is why today we have so many young people in Matabele land who are angry against Amashon, right? And they will not want to have anything to do with a political party, Amashon. And this is a victory for ZANU-PF. It has achieved that. Comrade Solangwane, why Mugabe not Muzorewa, Comrade Ngabuto, Nicholas Mapena? Mzorewa came late into the picture because the Capricorn Society split up in 1963, right? So Mzorewa just came late, and remember that Smith had rebelled against the crown in 11 November 1965 when he unilaterally declared independence. Because Smith had unilaterally declared independence, in 1979 worked with Mzorewa to create what was called Zimbabwe Rotage, right? And if Mzorewa could have continued to lead, it was not in the interest of the British and the Americans, right? This is why Mzorewa did not make it. So when then Mugabe took over, then a neo-colonial state emerged. We'll discuss that, Comrade Sola, this question further. About what does 11 November 1965 mean? What does unilateral declaration of independence mean versus the creation of a neo-colonial state in what we call Zimbabwe today on the 18th of April 1980? Comrades, thank you so much. Please write your comments. We will try our level best to respond. Otherwise, Amandla, comrades.